So if you drove down Fine Road in Linden, California, back in the mid-1980s, you would see exactly what you'd expect from the agricultural heartland.
Right. Very idyllic.
Yeah, exactly. You'd see rolling hills, endless peach orchards, these quiet irrigation canals, and likely you'd see two teenagers roaming those properties, seemingly just passing the time.
Just normal rural kids, or so it seemed.
Right. But what you wouldn't realize is that those two kids were meticulously mapping out what would eventually become one of the largest, most horrifying mass graves in American history.
It's a truly chilling thought.
It really is. So today, we are unpacking a 15-year reign of terror that stayed entirely hidden in plain sight. And it stayed hidden for one terrifying reason, which is that the killers knew the dirt better than the police did.
That is a profoundly jarring juxtaposition because, we naturally associate rural agrarian settings with safety, right?
Yeah, community, isolation from urban crime, that kind of thing.
Exactly. But when you examine the criminological data from San Joaquin and Calaveras counties during this specific era, the sheer scale of the violence is just staggering.
It's unbelievable.
We are dissecting a highly organized campaign of predatory violence that, it may have claimed up to 72 lives, and it was perpetrated by two individuals who essentially weaponized the very geography of their hometown.
So your mission for today's deep dive is to ride shotgun with us as we systematically reconstruct this timeline.
Yes, step by step.
Right. We are looking at the crimes of Wesley Howard Sherman Jr. and Lauren Joseph Herzog. The media eventually dubbed them the Speed Freak Killers.
A very apt, if sensational, name.
Yeah. And we have a massive stack of sources on the table today. We've got criminological profiles, deeply detailed forensic excavation records, trial transcripts, and, historical accounts of their early life.
Which are crucial for understanding the whole picture.
Absolutely. We're going to use all of this to really understand the criminology, the victimology, and the horrifying evolution of two childhood friends who turned the Central Valley into a literal hunting ground.
It's a dark journey, but an important one.
Okay, so let's unpack this. How do two kids from a quiet farming town evolve into apex predators? Because reading through these sources, I get this overwhelming sense that their environment wasn't just a backdrop.
You are exactly right. The geography was a highly effective tool for them.
Like an accomplice.
Yes, an unwitting accomplice. To truly comprehend the mechanics of these crimes, we have to look past just the timeline of what happened and deeply analyze why and how it happened.
Right, the root causes.
Precisely. Based on the sources provided, we can establish three fundamental pillars to understand this evolution. First, we must examine their socioeconomic upbringing on Fine Road.
Okay.
Second, we have to look at their intimate, almost granular knowledge of that local topography.
The terrain.
Right. And third, we must address the massive destabilizing pharmacological engine of their spree, which was methamphetamine.
The meth, yeah.
If you remove any one of those three pillars, this specific decades-long nightmare either doesn't happen or, it is stopped almost immediately.
So let's start with that first pillar, just getting the street-level view of their upbringing. Let's go out to Fine Road in Linden.
A very small community.
Extremely small. So
Wow.
Wesley Sherman Jr. was born in February 1966, and Lauren Herzog was born just a couple of months earlier in December 1965.
Right, so they were peers.
Yeah, exactly the same age.
Huh.
And they grew up just a few doors down from each other on this deeply rural stretch of road. Yeah. Linden itself had a population of fewer than 2,000 people.
Very isolated.
Yeah, there were virtually no other kids around out there.
Yeah.
So they formed this incredibly insular, tight-knit bond right away.
Which makes sense for the setting.
But what really jumped out at me in the case files is the socioeconomic dynamic, specifically regarding Sherman. His father wasn't just like a local farmer scraping by.
No, not at all.
He was a highly successful local contractor and real estate developer. That meant Sherman grew up with a substantial amount of wealth in a town where a lot of folks were living paycheck to paycheck.
And that wealth disparity is a critical factor in his early psychological development.
How so?
Well, what's fascinating here is the intersection of rural isolation and financial indulgence. In a micro-community of under 2,000 people, a wealthy local developer holds immense social capital.
Right, they're the big fish in a very small pond.
Exactly. Sherman was frequently spoiled with expensive gifts, vehicles, and the kind of financial backing that basically insulated him from consequence.
You could get away with anything.
Yes. Criminologists analyzing his developmental years note that this environment cultivated a profound pathological sense of entitlement in him.
Like the rules didn't apply.
Precisely. He began to operate under the ingrained assumption that he was simply above the local social order. The basic boundaries that applied to the other children in Linden simply did not apply to him.
And you see that entitlement manifesting as just total destruction right from the jump.
Early red flags.
Major red flags. We aren't talking about kids throwing a baseball through a window by accident. The neighbors explicitly described these two as total trouble.
They were actively malicious.
Yeah, they were intentionally throwing rocks through windows, engaging in early, highly aggressive substance abuse, and just actively harassing the people around them.
It was a pattern of behavior.
And it reached such an extreme degree that one neighbor actually went out of pocket to build a massive high fence around his property just to physically keep Shermantine and Herzog away.
That is a very telling detail.
I thought so too.
Yeah.
I mean, building a high fence on a massive rural lot is incredibly expensive and tedious. That tells you this isn't normal childhood mischief.
Exactly. It's a documented escalating pattern of early antisocial behavior. They are testing boundaries.
And breaking them.
Right. And because of that geographic isolation, coupled with the financial insulation provided by Shermantine's family, they aren't facing the kind of corrective consequences from law enforcement or the community that might normally redirect that behavior.
So they just keep going.
They do. Instead, their hostility becomes entrenched. It becomes their normal. And they channel all of this restless, aggressive energy into a rural hunter-gatherer lifestyle.
They spent a lot of time outside.
Massive amounts of their youth outdoors. They were constantly hunting and fishing, roaming the creeks, the deep irrigation canals, and those remote hills spanning Calaveras and San Joaquin counties.
Yeah, I was reading about how much time they spent in those hills, and I wrote this down because it struck me so hard. It's like they were mapping the very board game they would later rig.
That's a very accurate analogy.
They were learning every blind spot, every abandoned property, every dry creek bed. But I do want to pause here and really challenge this premise.
Okay, go ahead.
Because lots of kids hunt, especially in the 1970s and 80s in rural America.
Oh, absolutely. It's very common.
Right. Lots of kids grow up shooting rifles, tracking deer, getting into trouble, pushing boundaries, and they absolutely do not turn into prolific serial killers.
Most certainly do not.
So are we saying the wealth and the lack of discipline were enough to create a monster? What actually pushes this from rural mischief into the realm of a savage, predatory secret?
That is the pivotal question, really. And it's essential to delineate the difference between normal rural upbringing and the development of a predator.
Right.
The transition we are looking for isn't just about knowing how to shoot a rifle. It's a fundamental psychological shift from mastering the environment to dominating the people within it.
Okay, I see.
For most youths, hunting animals provides a sense of skill, providing, or just sport. For Shermantine and Herzog, it provided a distinct thrill rooted in power.
Like playing God.
Exactly. The absolute control over life and death. As they entered adolescence, specifically during their time at Linden High School before graduating in 1984, you see that need for dominance begin to generalize.
They started looking for new targets.
They weren't satisfied just hunting animals in the woods anymore. They became known in the community as severe physical bullies. They took active, visible pleasure in intimidating their peers.
So it moved from animals to people.
Right. They would hang around local spots, specifically the Linden Inn, trying to project this aura of untouchable menace. The hunting taught them how to stalk and conceal.
Wow.
And the bullying showed a growing pathological need to inflict fear and exercise total control over human beings.
So by the time they graduate in 1984, the foundation is poured and the concrete is set. They have the arrogance, they have a complete lack of empathy, they have the financial padding, and they possess a mental map of every hiding spot in a 100-mile radius.
A very dangerous combination.
And graduation brings a dangerous new level of freedom. They move out, they get an apartment together in the nearby city of Stockton, and that apartment becomes the incubator for the next phase.
Because that's where the third pillar enters the equation.
Exactly. Methamphetamine.
Yes. The establishment of that Stockton apartment in 1984 marks the exact inflection point where antisocial bullying behavior metastasizes into lethal serial predation.
It just poured gasoline on the fire.
It did. The moniker Speed Freak Killers is not just a sensational media catchphrase. It is a vital, clinical descriptor of their methodology and their pathology.
Right, it's literal.
To grasp the scale of their crimes, we have to understand the specific psychopharmacological impacts of methamphetamine as it existed in the Central Valley during the 1980s.
Which was a very specific kind of meth, right?
Yes, this was not a casual weekend recreational habit. This was chronic, escalating, and profoundly destructive to their neurobiology.
Right, because the Central Valley in the 80s was basically ground zero for this. We are talking about heavy, locally manufactured crank.
Biker meth, essentially.
Yeah, it's different from what we see today. So how exactly does flooding the brain with that specific level of methamphetamine rewire two guys who already have these sociopathic tendencies?
It's a crucial distinction. The crank of the 1980s was typically ephedrine or pseudoephedrine based, synthesized using red phosphorus.
Okay.
It was notoriously impure but incredibly potent in its central nervous system stimulation. Methamphetamine doesn't just step on the gas pedal of aggression, it actively cuts the brake lines in your brain.
Oh, wow. That's a terrifying way to put it.
It's neurologically accurate. Chronic ingestion heavily impairs the prefrontal cortex. That is the area of your brain responsible for executive function, long-term planning, impulse control, and, critically, the inhibition of violent or aberrant thoughts.
So the voice that says, don't do this, is just gone.
Exactly. When you chemically degrade that area over months and years, the internal mechanisms that tell a normal person, stop, this is wrong, simply fail.
God.
Furthermore, the drug induces a state of extreme, prolonged hyperarousal. It causes severe sleep deprivation, often keeping users awake for 6 to 10 days straight.
Which is going to make anyone lose their mind.
Right. It inevitably leads to intense paranoia, hallucinations, and violent agitation.
Wait, pause for a second. So if they are awake for a week straight, completely out of their minds on meth, hallucinating and paranoid, are they just acting in pure chaos?
You'd think so.
Right.
Yeah.
Because if their brains are that degraded, how are they organizing these massive hidden crimes? How are they covering their tracks so well?
That is the terrifying paradox of methamphetamine-fueled serial killers. We tend to think of meth binges as pure, disorganized chaos.
Right.
But their forensic awareness, the calculated way they disposed of evidence, which we will discuss, it shows a terrifying degree of cold-blooded logic running parallel to that drug-induced paranoia.
It's like two different brain states operating at once.
Yes, the meth stripped away their empathy and impulse control, but it did not destroy their cunning. And over time, the chronic use caused profound dopamine depletion.
Actually, explain that for the listener. What does dopamine depletion actually look like in everyday life?
It leads to a condition called anhedonia. For someone who hasn't studied psychology, anhedonia means you literally lose the biological capacity to feel normal joy or satisfaction.
So nothing feels good anymore.
Nothing. Eating a good meal, seeing a friend, watching a movie, none of it registers. The brain's reward system is just fried.
Wow.
To feel anything at all, the user requires an increasingly extreme stimulus. Remember the thrill they got from hunting animals?
Right, playing God.
Eventually, due to that dopamine depletion, animal prey was no longer sufficient. It didn't provide the neurochemical spike they craved. They required a much higher level of stimulation.
They needed to escalate.
Yes. They required human prey to sustain their state of hyperarousal. The criminological sources explicitly suggest that wanton violence became their form of entertainment.
That is sickening.
It was simply how they occupied the endless, sleepless hours of a meth binge.
And we really have to examine the dynamic between the two of them because they are doing this together. It's not just two lone wolves who occasionally cross paths. It's a partnership.
A very toxic one.
But reading through the psychological profiles, it wasn't an equal partnership, was it?
No, not at all. It was highly hierarchical. Psychologically, we look at this dyad through the lens of folie à deux, which translates to a madness shared by two.
Okay.
It's a shared psychotic disorder where a delusional belief system is transmitted from one individual to another. However, in this specific relationship, Wesley Shermantine was undeniably the dominant primary aggressor.
He was the ringleader.
Absolutely. His narcissistic personality, bolstered by his background of wealth and local status, positioned him as the alpha. Lauren Herzog functioned as the subservient accomplice.
So Herzog just followed along.
Yes. Herzog was the follower, drawn into the gravity of Shermantine's escalating madness and kept there by a mixture of drug dependency and fear.
But here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because years later, when Shermantine is sitting on death row, he tries to flip the script entirely.
Oh, he certainly tries.
Yeah. He spends years claiming that Herzog was the mastermind, that Herzog was the actual bloodthirsty killer, and that he, Shermantine, was just an innocent bystander who was too terrified of Herzog to stop him.
A classic narcissistic deflection.
Right, it's a classic deflection tactic, but it raises an important question. How does a toxic, unequal dynamic like that hold together?
It's complex.
Right, I mean, how do a dominant narcissist and a subservient accomplice keep a secret this massive, a secret involving potentially dozens of bodies for over a dozen years without one of them cracking under the guilt of the pressure?
It held together because their reality was entirely walled off by their shared substance abuse. They were mutually assured in their
They
destruction.
were trapped together.
Yes. The endless meth binges created an insular, distorted world where their horrific actions were normalized between the two of them.
An echo chamber.
Precisely. Shermantine's dominance and unpredictability likely kept Herzog terrified of ever stepping out of line or going to the police, while Herzog's constant compliance fed Shermantine's ego and validated his twisted sense of godhood.
So they fed off each other.
They constantly reinforced each other's worst impulses. When you're the only two people who know the truth, and you're constantly chemically altering your perception of reality together in a locked apartment, the outside world and its laws cease to feel real or threatening.
And that terrifying, isolated reality spills over into the actual world in the fall of 1984. This is where the confirmed spree officially begins.
Yes, the first known victims.
And I want us to walk through this chronology meticulously because the escalation is so fast, and the shift in who they choose to target is deeply revealing.
It tells us a lot about their motives.
So we start on November 27, 1984. The victims are Paul Raymond Kavanaugh, who is 31, and Howard King, who is 35. These are two grown men described in the files as drifters.
Yes.
They are found shot to death inside a car on a remote agricultural access road on Roberts Island, which is near Stockton. Now, ostensibly, the police initially listed the motive here as a robbery homicide.
Which was a misread of the scene.
Right, because the sources make a massive point to highlight that the amount of money actually stolen was completely negligible.
This initial confirmed event is highly instructive regarding their early methodology and their testing of the waters.
How so?
Well, Roberts Island is geographically isolated. It's exactly the kind of remote environment they had been mapping for years. A place where the noise of a gunshot and the presence of a parked car wouldn't attract any immediate attention.
So they chose the turf.
Right. But targeting two adult males suggests a high degree of confidence, likely artificially inflated by the methamphetamine.
That makes sense.
The robbery aspect is a flimsy veneer. The fact that only a negligible amount of money was taken indicates that financial gain was never the primary driver. The violence itself was the objective.
It was just a thrill kill.
Yes, a thrill kill. They were testing their ability to cross the ultimate line.
A thrill kill that acts as a gateway. Because just 2 weeks later, on December 11th, 1984, 19-year-old Kimberly Ann Billy disappears from eastern Stockton.
A very quick escalation.
And then a few months later, on August 29, 1985, 16-year-old Joanne Hobson disappears from eastern Stockton.
Another young woman.
Yeah, and Joanne actually ran in the same social circles. Her family knew the duo, and her mother immediately suspected them.
The community was already getting suspicious.
And then on October 16th, 1985, another 16-year-old, Chevelle Chevy Wheeler. Chevy actually skipped classes at Franklin High School, telling her friends she was going out to Valley Springs with Shermantan.
She trusted him.
She did. And he took her to his family's hunting cabin in a deeply brushy, isolated area of San Andreas up in Calaveras County. That is an incredible fundamental shift in their victimology in less than 12 months.
It is a radical and horrifying evolution. We see a distinct transition from targeting socioeconomically marginalized adult men, drifters left in the open in their vehicles.
Right.
We see a shift to targeting highly vulnerable young women and teenage girls. And the motivation shifts correspondingly.
Right.
We cannot look away from the brutal reality of this change or sanitize it. The primary motivation for targeting these young women was sexual assault.
It's all.
Trial testimonies, forensic evidence, and later disclosures confirm that rape and sodomy were central, driving elements of these crimes.
I think it's so vital we don't censor that or gloss over it with polite terms.
Yeah.
Because doing so removes the reality of the horror and gives it this sterile, true crime documentary distance.
Exactly. We have to face the facts.
It grounds us in the absolute nightmare of what these guys were doing. When you read the victim impact statements from the families, it just breaks you.
It's devastating.
I'm thinking specifically of Joanne Hobson's mother, Joan Shelley. She talked about how tiny her 16-year-old daughter was. She said Joanne was the size of a 10-year-old.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
And she described her daughter's murder as the slaughter of a little lamb.
Wow.
That phrase just echoes. It highlights the immense, sickening power disparity here. You have two grown, heavily armed men, completely fueled by methamphetamine, hunting down a girl the size of a child.
It is a profound tragedy, and it underscores the deeply predatory nature of their selection process. They weren't just selecting victims at random off the street.
They were hunting specific types of prey.
Exactly. They were selecting individuals they perceived as vulnerable, whether due to their youth, their size, or their geographic isolation.
Like Chevy Wheeler.
Chevy Wheeler is a textbook example of this predation. She was lured under the guise of a fun day skipping school. Shermantine weaponized trust, familiarity, and his local status to isolate her at that remote family cabin.
Completely removing her from any safety net.
Yes.
But as the victims changed, their methods of dealing with the aftermath had to change too. Leaving Kavanaugh and King in a car on Roberts Island is sloppy. It leaves a crime scene.
They realized that quickly.
And leaving evidence at a family hunting cabin in San Andreas is dangerous. It points right back to Shermantine. So they had to adapt. They needed a black hole.
And they found one.
Right. Where do you find a black hole in the middle of an agricultural valley? That question brings us to the most horrifying phase of their spree, which criminologists refer to as the dark middle period. And that stretches from roughly 1986 all the way to 1997.
During this massive decade-long window, the frequency of confirmed, neatly documented crimes appears to drop significantly.
But they didn't stop.
Make no mistake, the spree does not stop. Instead, their methods of concealment become far more sophisticated, making the crimes vastly harder to detect, let alone connect to one another.
They just got better at hiding it.
Yes, this is where they leverage that granular childhood knowledge of the landscape to an unprecedented, horrifying degree.
Right, because we still see them operating just in different ways and across different terrains. For example, we have the case of Henry Howell, a 41-year-old man found on Highway 88 up in Alpine County.
A very brutal case.
The brutality of this specific scene is shocking. He was bludgeoned. I mean, his head and teeth were literally bashed in. And then he was shot with his own shotgun, all for a tiny amount of pocket change.
Extremely violent.
Then in 1994, there's an unsolved murder of a hunter in northern Utah that perfectly matches a confession Herzog made later about a hunting vacation they took out of state.
Right, showing they were active outside of California, too.
And we have Robin Armtrout, found mutilated in a creek bed.
What these specific cases from the dark middle demonstrate is a terrifying dual-track modus operandi.
Two different styles.
Exactly. On one hand, you have opportunistic, impulse-driven violence encountered on the road, like Henry Howell or the Utah hunter.
Just spontaneous.
This is the meth talking. It's the inability to suppress a violent urge when an opportunity presents itself. On the other hand, you have the highly calculated predatory abduction and concealment of women.
Sure.
And for that concealment, they moved entirely away from leaving bodies in vehicles or near identifiable family properties. They transitioned to using century-old, abandoned agricultural wells located on Flood Road in Linden.
So they have this massive problem of disposing of evidence, and they turn to the terrain. Let's look closely at these wells, because this is where the sheer nightmare logic of the speed freak killers really takes hold.
It's macabre.
For the listener who hasn't been on a 19th century farm, these are not just little holes in the ground. These are massive agricultural wells, dug decades, sometimes a full century ago, stretching 45 feet deep straight down into the earth.
Massive shafts.
Over the years, as farming practices changed, they dried up and were filled with decades of farming debris, old wood, dirt, and garbage. It's the perfect ready-made disposal site. But only if you have the hyper-local knowledge to know it's even there.
Exactly. It requires localized generational knowledge to know these wells exist out in the brush, let alone how to access them without drawing attention from neighboring farms.
Right, you'd have to know the area like the back of your hand.
And their method of utilizing these wells is a dark testament to their forensic awareness, rudimentary as it might have been, and their absolute lack of humanity.
It's just evil.
They wouldn't just drop the victims into the dark and walk away. We must state the grim reality of the mechanism here. Herzog would pour gallons of gasoline down into these 45-foot deep shafts and ignite it.
Oh, God. So what does this all mean when we step back and look at it? You have the calculated, fiery destruction of DNA deep inside the earth, happening parallel to an event like Henry Howell.
The contrast is jarring.
They're driving down the road, they pass a guy parked on Highway 88, and spontaneously decide to cave his head in and shoot him with his own gun for a few bucks. It shows there was zero cooling off period, right?
Not at all.
The violence was entirely impulse-driven by the meth at a moment's notice, but simultaneously they were calculated enough to burn the evidence of their other crimes so thoroughly.
It reveals a complete disintegration of moral and cognitive boundaries. The destruction in the wells, specifically the calcination of bone, which occurs when fire burns away all the organic material and leaves only a fragile mineral matrix.
Right.
That was a deliberate, calculated act to frustrate future law enforcement efforts. They understood the basic forensic principle that nobody means no crime.
But then they do something sloppy like Howell.
Yet, the murder of Henry Howell illustrates that the neurological damage from the methamphetamine was so severe that they could not suppress the urge to kill, even when it was incredibly risky, messy, and yielded absolutely no logical reward.
The violence was the point.
The violence was no longer a means to an end. The violence was the end itself.
And it's exactly that chaotic, drug-fueled arrogance that eventually catches up to them. After a decade of moving in the shadows, destroying evidence, and largely targeting people who were marginalized or easily isolated, they make their fatal mistake.
A huge miscalculation.
We're now in November 1998. The victim is 25-year-old Cindy Vanderheiden. And the background here is crucial to understanding their downfall. Cindy wasn't a drifter. She wasn't a runaway. She was the daughter of the owner of the Linden Inn.
This is a critical pivot in their victim selection, and as you noted, a fatal miscalculation born of pure hubris.
They got too comfortable.
The Linden Inn was the social hub of the community. It was where everyone gathered. Cindy was a prominent, well-known, and deeply loved local figure. When she vanished on November 14th, the community reaction was immediate, organized, and intense. She wasn't someone who could simply disappear without raising alarm bells across the entire town and the local police department.
And where was she last seen? She was last seen at her father's bar, drinking with Wesley Shermantine and Lauren Herzog.
Which is just astounding arrogance.
Because remember from earlier, they were regulars there. They drank there. They socialized there. You, listening to this right now, imagine the chilling betrayal felt by that community.
That must have been horrific.
The stomach-dropping realization that the monsters who had been stealing their daughters and sisters weren't strangers driving through town on the interstate. They were the guys sitting 2 stools down at the local bar. They were the guys who grew up down the street.
The audacity is staggering, and it highlights the complete loss of risk assessment caused by long-term methamphetamine abuse and unchecked ego.
They thought they were untouchable.
They attacked the daughter of the man who owned their local watering hole. Because of this undeniable connection, the police investigation immediately focused on them with a laser intensity that they hadn't faced before.
They were finally the prime suspects.
This wasn't a cold case or a missing person report filed days later. This was a hot pursuit of 2 known suspects by investigators who immediately sensed foul play.
And that focus pays off. The police hone in on Shermantine, and they execute a search warrant on his car. Now remember, these guys have been burning bodies in 45-foot wells to destroy DNA.
Right, trying to eliminate all physical evidence.
But in his car, investigators find a small, almost microscopic amount of blood. By 1998, moving into 1999, forensic science had evolved massively.
The technology had finally caught up to them.
The DNA technology that didn't exist when Chevy Wheeler went missing in 1985. Things like PCR amplification and STR analysis, which allow labs to test tiny degraded samples. That tech is now readily available.
And it changed everything.
The lab tests the blood from the car, and it's a match. It's Cindy Vanderheiden's blood. It is the absolute forensic smoking gun that finally pierces the armor.
That single drop of blood shattered the wall of invincibility they had built around themselves for 14 years. It provided the irrefutable empirical link between the suspects and the victim that the prosecution desperately needed to move forward.
It was over.
On March 17, 1999, both Shermantine and Herzog were finally arrested. But as the historical record of the American justice system shows, an arrest is rarely the end of the story in cases of this magnitude.
No, the arrest was just the opening of a profoundly frustrating, fragmented, and controversial pursuit of justice. Let's look at how the legal system handled these 2 men, starting with Shermantine's trial in 2001.
It was a very revealing trial.
The prosecution didn't just paint him as a killer. They exposed him as a prolific serial sexual predator. There was a moment in the 2001 trial that completely strips away the clinical data and shows you exactly what it was like to be hunted by him.
Yes, the survivor's testimony.
A woman took the stand, a survivor. She testified that she was just driving down a local road when Shermantine intentionally rear-ended her car.
Just a manufactured accident.
When she did the normal, safe thing and pulled over to the side of the road to exchange insurance information, he immediately pulled a knife on her. He abducted her.
Unbelievable.
The only reason she survived, the only reason she was able to sit in that courtroom and point at him was because she made the terrifying split-second decision to leap out of his moving vehicle onto the pavement.
That testimony is a visceral, terrifying demonstration of his opportunistic predation. He turned a mundane, everyday traffic accident into a life-or-death abduction scenario in seconds.
Right, in broad daylight, essentially.
Given the overwhelming weight of evidence against him, including the DNA from the car and powerful testimonies like the one you just described, the jury convicted Shermantine of 4 counts of first-degree murder.
And he got the maximum sentence.
He was sentenced to death and sent to San Quentin State Prison.
But then we look at Lauren Herzog. And this is where the system just breaks down in the eyes of the victims' families. Herzog initially gets convicted too. He is given 78 years for 3 murders.
Which seemed like justice at the time.
But in 2004, a California appeals court steps in and completely overturns his conviction. The legal loophole. Investigators had illegally coerced his confession.
It was a massive procedural error.
Herzog had explicitly invoked his right to counsel. He asked for a lawyer, and the police kept interrogating him anyway. Because of that, his confession gets thrown out under the fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine.
Which crippled the case.
The state's case is crippled. Herzog takes a plea deal for voluntary manslaughter. And in 2010, this man who helped hunt humans for a decade and a half is paroled. He walks free out of prison.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of jurisprudence, we are confronting the immense friction between procedural law and moral justice.
That's hard to reconcile.
I want to explain exactly why this happened. The appellate court's decision was legally sound based on the Fifth Amendment and established constitutional protections stemming from Miranda v. Arizona.
Okay.
The right to counsel during a custodial interrogation is a cornerstone of the American legal system, designed to prevent state abuse and forced confessions. Once a suspect asks for an attorney, all questioning must cease immediately.
But they kept going.
The detectives in this case ignored that rule, hoping to secure a confession that would lock him away. However, the legal doctrine known as the fruit of the poisonous tree dictates that any evidence derived from an illegal interrogation is inadmissible in court.
So they lost it all.
In this specific application, the rigid adherence to that vital constitutional procedure resulted in a known participant in multiple serial murders having his words stricken from the record, allowing him to walk out of prison gates.
It's infuriating.
It created a profoundly bizarre and agonizing dynamic. The subservient accomplice was completely free, while the dominant aggressor sat on death row.
And sitting on death row in California, as we know, means effectively sitting in a waiting room forever due to the state's moratorium on executions.
Yes, practically shielded from the penalty.
Shermantine is sitting in a cell, watching his partner in crime walk free and live his life. And this creates this incredibly volatile psychological situation that is ultimately broken open not by the police, but by a bounty hunter named Leonard Padilla in 2012.
A very unconventional intervention.
Padilla realizes Shermantine is absolutely furious at Herzog, and he knows Shermantine is greedy. So Padilla offers Shermantine a bounty. He offers him $33,000.
A substantial amount.
And what does Shermantine want the money for? Not for legal appeals. He wants to buy prison luxuries. He wants to buy candy bars, typewriters, and shoes from the commissary.
It's absurd.
In exchange for candy money, Shermantine begins drawing hand-sketched maps of the body locations from his cell.
The ethics of this arrangement are heavily debated within the criminological and legal communities. You are essentially incentivizing a serial killer, feeding his extreme narcissism, and allowing him to exert control over the victims' families from behind bars.
Just playing a game with them.
However, Padilla recognized a psychological lever and pulled it. Shermantine's deep resentment toward Herzog's freedom, combined with his base, impulsive desires, fractured the long silence.
Right.
But Padilla made a calculated and ultimately tragic tactical move. He tipped off Lauren Herzog. He let Herzog know that Shermantine was drawing maps, locating the wells, and singing to the authorities.
And the fallout of that tip-off is immediate. In January 2012, right after Padilla tells him the maps are being drawn, Lauren Herzog commits suicide.
He couldn't have faced going back.
He hangs himself. And in doing so, he takes whatever full, unvarnished truth he held straight to the grave. He effectively escapes any final legal or public reckoning.
A coward's way out.
But the hand-drawn maps survive. And those maps lead investigators back to the quiet agricultural fields of Linden, back to that dark middle period we talked about. They lead them to the abandoned wells on Flood Road.
The excavation of the Flood Road well in February 2012 is a landmark event in forensic recovery, but it is also one of the most highly criticized operations in modern investigative history.
Oh, it was a mess.
The authorities were faced with a monumental task, a 45-foot deep shaft filled with decades of compacted earth, heavy agricultural debris, and the severely burned, commingled remnants of human bodies.
It's a nightmare scenario for an investigator.
Their approach was aggressive and industrial. They utilized heavy machinery, specifically large backhoes, to dig out the well.
And this causes an absolute uproar in the forensic community. We have experts like retired FBI agent Jeff Reineck going on the record heavily criticizing this.
Yes, very vocal criticism.
Reineck argued that using a giant metal claw to scoop out a mass grave is literally destroying evidence. He argued they were actively mishandling human remains, crushing fragile bones under the weight of the machinery, and destroying the spatial context that a slow, archaeological-style grid dig would preserve.
The criticism from the forensic community is scientifically entirely valid. Let me explain why.
Please do.
In forensic anthropology, context is almost as important as the physical remains themselves. This relies on the principle of stratigraphy, the study of the specific layers in which items are found.
Right, like digging through time.
Exactly. If you carefully excavate layer by layer, the stratigraphy can tell you the exact sequence of deaths, the specific methods of disposal used over time, and it preserves microscopic trace evidence.
And a backhoe just ruins that.
A backhoe pulling up tons of dirt at once obliterates that context entirely. However, the authorities in San Joaquin County argued that the sheer depth of the well, the dangerous instability of the soil, and the literal tons of compacted debris made a delicate hand trowel excavation physically impossible.
And dangerous, right?
And lethally dangerous for the workers. It is a stark, frustrating example of the compromise between theoretical forensic ideals and the grim, practical, physical realities of field recovery.
Well, despite the blunt force methods, the yield from that well is staggering, and it is heartbreaking. They pull up over 1,000 human bone fragments.
From just one well.
They pull up partial skulls. And mixed in with the dirt, the ash, and the rusted farm equipment, they find the personal artifacts that make the horror so real. A press, a pair of shoes, some jewelry, a coat.
Just everyday items.
They sent all of this to the California Department of Justice labs. And through DNA profiling, they are finally able to identify Kimberly Billy. They identified Joanne Hobson.
Finally giving them names again.
And in a separate dig near the San Andreas property, they find Chevy Wheeler and Cindy Vanderheiden. They finally bring these girls home to their families.
Bringing them home provides a measure of closure, but the excavation also unearthed mysteries that remain unsolved to this day.
Yeah, the Jane Doe.
Among the heavily commingled remains in the well, forensic anthropologists made a haunting discovery. They identified the remains of a young woman, estimated to be between 16 and 21 years old, approximately 5 feet 7 inches tall.
Right.
But tragically, they also found the remains of an unidentified fetus with her. She is known in the files as the pregnant Jane Doe.
It just stops you in your tracks. A young, pregnant girl thrown into an agricultural well and set on fire. And despite the incredible work of forensic anthropologists like Dr. Eric Bartlink, her identity remains a complete mystery.
We still don't know who she is.
We don't know her name. We don't know who was looking for her. Which leads me to ask you, how do we move forward? How do we solve cases from the 80s and 90s when the perpetrators are either dead, like Herzog, or playing manipulative games from death row, like Sherman Team?
It seems impossible.
Yeah. How do you get DNA from a burned bone?
The path forward lies entirely in the rapid evolution of forensic science, specifically genetic genealogy. The investigative limitations of 1985, or even 2012, are no longer the limitations of today. Extracting DNA from burned bone, calcined bone, is incredibly difficult because the heat destroys the DNA molecule.
Right, just incinerates it.
However, current cold case investigators are leveraging advanced extraction techniques to find microscopic fragments of surviving DNA trapped deep within the mineral matrix of the bone.
Oh, wow.
Once they extract that tiny fragment, they use specialized laboratories like Guthrum to map hundreds of thousands of genetic markers called SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms.
Amazing.
They build a comprehensive genetic profile and cross-reference it with public genealogy databases. They then painstakingly map the family trees outward, generation by generation, until they find the missing branch.
The person who disappeared in 1988 and was never reported.
Yes, it is a slow, painstaking process of scientific attrition, but is currently our best and perhaps only hope to give a name back to the pregnant Jane Doe and the countless other fragments recovered from that soil.
It is a long, slow march to try and right these historical wrongs. When you look back at the totality of what we've covered today, the legacy of the Speed Freak killers is almost too massive to hold in your head.
It's overwhelming.
You have a 14-year reign of terror. You have two men fueled by a catastrophic combination of local wealth, toxic entitlement, and chronic methamphetamine abuse.
Yeah.
And they managed to hide it all within the agricultural heartland of California.
It forces a total reevaluation of the American rural landscape.
It really does.
The very geography that provided the residents of Linden with a sense of peace, community, and isolation, it provided Shermantine and Herzog with camouflage and absolute impunity. They weaponized the quiet.
And that is what I hope you, the listener, take away from this deep dive. The very things we often seek out when we want to escape, isolated rural landscapes, quiet creeks, wide open spaces. Those are the exact environments that can become the perfect hunting ground for predators who know the terrain better than anyone else.
A dark reality.
They mapped the board game as kids, and then they rigged it. And as we sign off, here is one final, deeply unsettling thought to mull over. We know that authorities recovered over 1,000 bone fragments from just one well on Flood Road.
Just one location.
And we know that Wesley Shermantine, sitting on death row, eating bounty-funded candy bars, has continually boasted about the existence of other boneyards scattered across the county.
He claims there are more.
So you have to wonder, as the wind blows across the Central Valley tonight, how many other century-old wells hidden in that vast, quiet California landscape are silently holding on to the secrets of the Speed Freak killers.